Andrew Thomas McCarthy was never meant to be a movie star. He was meant to be the architect of a quiet life, an uncertain boy raised in the hushed suburbs of Westfield, New Jersey, where his ambition was often subdued. His father worked in finance and his mother was an artist, but McCarthy felt an intense gravitational pull toward the missing center of his own identity, a feeling that manifested as shyness and an innate sense of being out of step with the world around him. This feeling, this discomfort with himself, ultimately led him to the stage, not out of a burning desire for fame, but as a necessary form of escape, a way to occupy the skin of someone else for a mercifully brief period of time. He briefly attended New York University's prestigious Tisch School of the Arts, but unlike the method-driven peers who would later populate his world, McCarthy was interested only in the raw experience of acting, the feeling of presence it offered, an illusion he would cling to for decades. His path into the industry began with minor roles, including the 1983 coming-of-age drama class, where his distinctive look, a pair of soulful, slightly wounded blue eyes, and a perpetually wistful expression, immediately marks him in the eyes of casting directors as the ideal, romantic, leading man. This image, gentle and non-threatening, solidified with the 1985 ensemble film St. Elmo's Fire, a defining piece of media about a group of recent college graduates navigating the treacherous waters of post-university. The film itself was merely a commercial success, but the cultural fallout was explosive, triggered by a single seismic article in New York Magazine that year. Titled Hollywood's Brat Pack, the piece was meant to profile his co-star, Emilio Estevez, but it quickly devolved into a collective indictment, labeling the young cohort as interchangeable, privileged, sucker, and shallow, a dismissive title that McCarthy himself would later describe as a profound career death sentence. He was no longer an actor. He was a label, a branded commodity, whose narrative was written before he even entered the audition room, a sticky definition that followed him like a shadow across the world's largest backlots. Despite the newly imposed stigma, the roles continued, driven by the sheer commercial power of his persona. In 1986, he starred opposite Molly Ringwald in John Hughes' essential teen classic, Pretty in Pink, where he played Blaine McDonough, the rich kid from the right side of the tracks who chooses love over class, a performance that carried a subtly complicated layer of self-doubt and shame. Suggesting Blaine, like McCarthy himself, felt a deep sense of inauthenticity. The movie was a monumental hit, further cementing McCarthy as the archetypal sweet, reliable heartthrob, the sensitive foil to the industry's more overtly golden boy idols, like Rob Lowe. His accessibility was his power. He was neither too cool for men to relate to nor too aloof for women to adore, striking a perfect, unassuming balance. Yet, the internal dissonance was growing. By the time he took on the dark, nihilistic role of Clay in the 1987 adaptation of Bret Easton Ellis's novel Less Than Zero, he was living a parallel life to his character. The film, a gritty look at drug-fueled self-destruction in wealthy Los Angeles, required a raw vulnerability, which McCarthy provided, admitting later that he was already struggling with his own daily heavy drinking, recognizing the profound emptiness the characters were trying to numb. The characters were trying to numb. The success of the utterly ridiculous and joyful Mannequin the same year, a complete 180 in tone, only emphasized his pervasive feeling of being a commercially successful fraud, a face on a million posters who had no internal map to his own identity. As the decade turned into the 1990s, the Brat Pack label had done its slow, corrosive damage. Hollywood, the machine that created him, now struggled to place him. He was no longer a teenager, but he wasn't yet an adult, leading man in the traditional rugged sense. He was perpetually trapped as the romantic interest in a generation that had moved on. His attempted reunion with Molly Ringwald in 1988's Fresh Horses was a critical and commercial failure, a clear sign that the magic of the 80s was over. He took roles in films like Weekend at Bernie's and its sequel, which became surprise hits but were, by his own admission, taken for purely financial reasons, a desperate scramble to stay afloat as the quality of offers plummeted. By the mid-90s, he was relegated to supporting roles in films like The Joy Luck Club and straight-to-video releases, a subtle but relentless decline that left him feeling deeply irrelevant. This period of professional disorientation coincided with an escalation of his alcohol use. He describes his 20s as a time of external validation and his 30s as a period of acute invisibility, a man who felt special but did not feel enough, using alcohol not for spectacle, but for the simple, daily task of numbing the sensation of not belonging. The sensation of not belonging. The pivot, when it came, was quiet, unconventional, and had nothing to do with a dramatic Hollywood redemption arc. In the early 2000s, McCarthy began to travel, initially just to escape the feeling of being professionally and personally stuck. This displacement evolved into a new vocation. He started penning travel essays, honest and introspective pieces that focused not on the glamour of the destination, but on the vulnerability of the traveller, getting lost, being alone, and grappling with the gap between who he was and who he thought he ought to be. His honesty resonated, and by 2010, he was named an editor-at-large for National Geographic Traveller. This career was not a fallback, it was a revelation. It provided him with a profound sense of purpose that the endless act of performing had never offered. In writing, he could simply be himself. Simultaneously, he began directing episodic television, a behind-the-camera pursuit he loved because it was purely about craft and collaboration, rather than the isolating, intoxicating spotlight he had grown to distrust. He found a new sense of utility, a necessary replacement for fame. McCarthy's personal life was also marked by a slow, difficult journey toward authenticity. He was married to Carol Schneider, with whom he had 2 children, but the marriage ended around 2005. A casualty of his emotional unavailability and the avoidance that had characterized much of his early life. His second marriage to Irish writer and activist Dolores Rice, beginning in 2011, marked a true shift, a relationship where he finally allowed himself to stop performing poor. The most public manifestation of this clarity came with his 2021 memoir, Brat, an 80s story, a raw self-critical confrontation with the label he had avoided for decades, detailing his struggle with alcohol not as a grand rock-bottom tale, but as a slow show. Continuous realization that he simply did not want to live in a state of self-betrayal any longer. The book and its subsequent 2024 Hulu documentary adaptation Brat, which he directed, reuniting him with his former co-stars, allowed him to finally process the complex legacy of the era without indulging in cheap nostalgia or defensive posturing. His journey is the story of an identity that cannot be sustained by external desire. Andrew McCarthy did not disappear. He simply stopped trying to be the person everyone else demanded, finding a quiet, enduring clarity that, unlike the blinding lights of the 1980s, finally feels real.